Welcome to Realm 3 Studio, February 16th, 2025, and I'm here with my oldest daughter, Lexie, and just wanted to share a time with her so she can share a little bit about some God encounters in her life. And one thing that I know was a huge impact on all of us was when she was a young girl. I don't even remember how old you were, about maybe
15.
14 or so. She had a horse and ended up loving that horse. Horse loved her, and yeah. So there was an encounter that happened that kind of shook us as a family, but definitely shaped Lexie in her own understanding of God and how He works in her life. So I'll just let you share a little bit about that story.
That was so crazy. I was 15, and in my mind, the way that it happened is not the way that it happened, because the accident caused memory loss and it totally altered like my recollection of the event. So in my mind, I was like, it happened during spring break, and it happened like in the middle of like the pasture, and I don't remember accurately. So some of it is because of like just the impact of the head trauma and stuff. But what happened, as I've been told, was I was riding, and I do remember bits and pieces, but I was riding my horse, and I'd like kind of started getting interested in barrel riding, and so I was trying to work on cutting and just trying to do some fun stuff and just learn, and all self-taught, so none of it's really that good, but I remember taking her, like we had this pasture that was kind of L-shaped, and I would take her like following the fence, and we were outside the fence that day,
kind of between our yard and the actual
like pasture. I like to do it outside because the grass was just a little bit longer and it just felt more fun, and so I had taken her out, and I'd been riding for a while. And one of the things that I remember that my brother always brings up, that RJ always brings up, is that on my last pass right before the accident happened, he liked to wander the pasture and look for stuff. And so I remember he was out in the pasture just kind of looking for things and picking up rocks and playing army guys and stuff. And I had ridden past him, and I stopped, and I was like, do you want to ride back to the house? Because he was kind of a long ways away. And he was like, no, I'm okay. And he didn't really like riding horses. So it was kind of a normal thing for him to be like, no, I really don't want to. There's no reason he would have said yes, ever. Right. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go back then. And he was like, okay. And off he went. And I turned around and came back, turned around to go the other direction. And at a full gallop, she slipped. And her feet went out from under her. And I remember kicking out of the stirrups. And I remember falling. But I don't remember anything after that until like a little while later. But she ended up on top of me, on top of my leg. It was my left leg. But she was laying like up to my knee, about my, like just above my knee.
You were pinned pretty good.
Yeah, but I was pinned, like her head was here and her legs were on both sides of my head.
Which was odd how you ended up in that position.
It was so weird. Like she would have had to like flip over, and I would have had to flip over. It's almost like we kind of went like horse and rider, and we went like this. And I don't really remember the fall, and I think I must have been out for a minute or so at least, because I started screaming, and RJ was outside and heard it and came running, but I don't remember that.
Yeah, he ran. He would have been 10.
He was 11.
10, 11.
I was 15.
And so I wasn't home. Your mom was home, and I was 15 minutes away working, but And so what she said was that RJ ran into the house and said, "Mom, Lexie's dead." Which
no, he said
panicked.
he said bride is dead, Lexie's screaming.
Oh, well, she took it as that you were dead.
That's how she heard it, but he said bride is dead and Lexie's screaming because bride was
bride
laying
wasn't moving.
And I was screaming so she could hear me.
Yeah.
Yeah. But bride was just laying still.
So then she runs out there to see what's going on. And it's amazing, like as you continue to share this, it's amazing how God worked in this whole thing, because it makes no sense how it shouldn't have turned out differently.
So much, because the way I was laying with her, like I was under her belly and she was facing, I was facing her belly. Mm-hmm. And her legs were on both sides of my head.
And you were using your free leg to kick her.
And I remember I have lucid moments of memory. Like I remember a few lucid moments thinking just like in the moment that I could get her off by kicking and pushing her. And I was like really kicking her and I had my leg drawn up and I just remember thinking, I can get her off because my leg was pinned and it hurt so much. And she would try to roll. And as she would roll, if she had rolled up, she would have crushed me.
And she attempted a couple of times until you screamed.
And I would scream louder. And she would lay still.
Yep. Then
I would kick her and she would just take it and she wouldn't move.
Yeah, it was so unusual. Because because when your mom went out, she called, I don't know who she called first, but she called 911 or whatever. Then she called your aunt who lived next door. She comes over. RJ gets a hold of Bride's face, her bride's nose, and begins praying over Bride.
An 11-year-old. Who does that? What 11-year-old does that?
And your aunt grabs both of Bride's hind
legs,
hind hooves. You're kicking her belly, and every indicator, if anybody knows anything about horses,
she should have freaked out.
She should have freaked out. She should have panicked.
She should have rolled and crushed me.
And also knowing how horses get up from their side, they fold their hind legs right underneath them to rock and stand up, which is right where you were.
Yeah, I should have.
So there was no way for her to get up without crushing you.
Yeah, but she just laid there. It was just like the most amazing thing. I don't really remember a ton of it. I remember. It makes me cry. I remember RJ praying for me and telling me, "You have to hold still. You have to hold still." That was just so crazy because I don't really remember a lot, but I remember moments of thinking like, get her off, and then them telling me you need to hold still, and then I would lay still. And I don't remember her getting up, and I don't remember anything else until after the ambulance got there beyond that. And so everybody's account of what had happened, because I remember that Uncle John came out and that Marshall came out, but I don't remember them being there. I just remember that they were there, but I don't remember seeing them.
Yeah. Well, when your mom called me.
And I don't remember Gloria being there either.
Yeah.
And I don't remember Mom being there, but I remember RJ holding, like, holding my face and praying for me. And I remember.
Prayed for the horse.
Yeah. I do have one really small memory of Mom telling me, Lexie, you have to hold still. You have to hold still. And then RJ was telling me, you have to hold still.
Because they were afraid that Bride was going to panic.
Yeah.
That's why.
And I know I was screaming, but I don't remember that either.
Well, when she called me, I jumped in the vehicle and I bolted home. I got there before the emergency response. But right before I got there, because when she called me, she said, like, she's pinned under her horse, you need to come home. And so when I got there, Bride was grazing. And the way your mom described it was miraculous. It was almost like God made her completely feather light. Because, again, for a horse to get up from that position, they have to tuck their legs under them and rock. And somehow she kind of just tipped up and kept her legs straight and just tipped up on her hooves and walked away, and with no extra pain or pressure to you whatsoever.
Yeah,
absolute God thing, that God somehow just made her light to stand up in the way that's impossible.
Yeah, it was such a wild experience. I don't remember a lot of it. And the bits that I do remember are really fuzzy. Just I've been able to kind of piece it together.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it was just like I remember missing school, and I don't remember much
You
of
had a
that
bit of
year.
swelling. You were bruised up pretty good on the side of your face.
I remember the scratches.
You had some swelling in your brain a little bit.
Yeah,
That
I hit
caused
my
some
head
problems.
so hard. What's crazy about that too, though, is up until that point, I'd been having seizures.
Mm-hmm.
After the accident, I never had another one.
Mm-hmm.
Never. It was like it knocked something right in my brain. Like God used it to correct it. It was so weird.
We never did figure out what those little seizures were for. You had 2 or 3 of them, and we never.
It was really
did figure
weird.
that out.
Yeah, it was really cool. And I remember afterwards. Actually, I remember just like a really funny anecdote about it was Grandma Clara had broken her hip at one point when we lived there. And we were there when the ambulance, like we'd gone over the whole family. And the ambulance came, and when they put the backboard underneath her and clipped it together, it pinched her.
Yeah.
I remembered that in that moment. And I remember them trying to cut my boots off, and I wouldn't let them. And before they could cut them off, I kicked my boots off because they were nice boots. And I was like, these are my riding boots. You're not cutting my riding boots off. So I kicked my riding boots off before they were like, don't move. And I kicked them off. And then I remembered
thoughts of getting pinched with that board.
And then I remembered that. And as they slid the board under, they were like, you don't need to move. Don't move. Hold still, hold still. And I lifted myself up because I was like, they pinched Grandma. And you don't think about like, Grandma was like 90 when that happened. And they pinched her because she was kind of saggy. But in my mind, I was like, I'm not getting pinched because she yelled at them. And I was like, that had to hurt. So I just like, I remembered that really random moment in my head and like made sure that they didn't pinch me as it slid it together. And I remember Debbie Lamb in the ambulance and telling me, you can't sleep. And then I remember throwing up in the CAT scan.
You had a concussion.
I was really not good. And then the next thing I remember is Erin Wright visiting me in the hospital. She happened to be down there. She came and visited me. And I remember one moment I was awake and RJ came in. It always makes me cry because he came in and we had like this special handshake we would do. And he came in and we did our handshake, and he said later, he told me like not that long ago, he told me, I knew when you could do that you were okay. Just like a really random thing to remember. And then the only thing I remember after that until like going home was it was cold out, or I was cold or something. And we stopped at Dixon Drug, and you got me that bright green Mountain Dew hoodie that I loved. And I had it up until just a few years ago. I finally weeded it out. But every time I looked at that, I was like, oh yeah, I actually remember getting that. It's one of the only things I remember about that whole thing.
So what was, like, how did that shift? How did that change your focus and your relationship with God before to after that whole event, after things kind of got pieced together and understanding what all had happened?
After that, Mom and I had some good talks after that happened because I was home while everybody else was at school. And so she and I had some good talks after that. And I don't remember most of them, but one of them in particular, I remember. She told me, God saved you for a reason. He saved you for a purpose. And then she told me, go say thank you to your horse because she saved your life. And so I did. I was so afraid, though, for the longest time to even stand next to her because that just like fear that she's just going to fall over, which is not how horses work. Right. But in my mind, standing next to her was such a hurdle to overcome, and being able to saddle her again, because in my 15-year-old brain, she tipped over because I didn't remember the incident. Right. So standing next to her and having to learn to trust that she is not going to just fall over on me. And if I reach under and gird her, she's not going to just fall over on me. And so I made myself walk behind her again and crawl. She was one of those horses you could crawl under her and
she was.
And so it had been a normal practice for me to just walk underneath her because she was so tall. And so I made myself. I was like, I am not going to be afraid. I am not going to be afraid.
What a testament to overcoming.
Oh,
fear.
I loved her. I didn't want to be afraid to get on her. And you told me at one point, you have to get back on her. You have to get back on or you'll never ride again. And I loved riding. So I would make myself stand next to her for longer than my fear. And then I would make myself walk under her, which is not good horseman practice. Don't do that.
Right.
But I would make myself go back and walk under her to get the gird and then come back to strap her back in. And yeah, I remember that was such a God thing though, because I remember being so scared of just being next to her for a while. And he gave me so many precious moments with her. And horses are so weird. She was such a jerk sometimes.
Oh, she could be ornery.
She was such a jerk. But after that happened, I went out for the first time to talk to her. And I petted her head and she came up to me and she hugged me.
Almost like check and see you're okay.
Yeah.
Interesting how God
she like nuzzled my face. And sometimes she would nuzzle your face and headbutt you, you know? Right. So you're like, but she wrapped her neck over me and pulled me in and hugged me. It was like the weirdest thing. But I was like,
God gave her a gentle spirit in that moment.
In that moment. Yeah. She was not always a Christian horse.
Right.
Not always. But yeah, that was like such a thing because God was just like reassuring me that this is still a part of your life. I'm going to use this and you're going to love it.
So how did you use it?
Honestly, I can tie so much tenacity back to those moments. That determination to overcome fear and to push forward through hard and scary things and to lean on him in that way all ties back. Like I can root that back to that moment, to that overcoming moment of I've been this afraid before.
Yeah.
I've been this afraid and I've survived.
Yeah.
And I've been this afraid, and when I leaned on him, I had peace.
Even just the reality of how Bride got off of you in and of itself is like God took care of that.
He just handled it.
Like, yeah, he's trustworthy.
Yeah. But it like
work miracles.
Yeah, it builds in the back of your head like God's done bigger things for me already, you know, and that he had a purpose for me through that. He saved me for a reason. So if he put that much work into rescuing me then, not to mention what he did on the cross, but in that moment in my life, he put so much effort into me in that moment. He could not have saved me just for this scary thing that I'm dealing with now. There has to be more.
So what do you think that
purpose.
Is? Have you discovered that? Have there been things that he's revealed to you since then?
There have been so many things, but I keep thinking that like having run from motherhood for such a long time, finally accepting my role in that
can you elaborate on that?
The only thing, like after I like graduated, I got duped and married a guy that I barely knew who was a lot older than me. And looking back, I'm like, oh, he was a groomer. That makes sense. And that was like such an emotionally and mentally abusive relationship. And it lasted for such a long time that, and he told me so many things about motherhood that like, you'll never be a good mom. And you're never going to be ready for that. You're just not going to be a good mom. So there's no point in having kids. And so many things like that really fed into my false identity. And then moving from when that relationship was finally over and that marriage finally dissolved, moving straight into another physically abusive relationship and really controlling relationship. When I got pregnant, it was such a godsend for me, because it was like my first marriage, he had me convinced that I couldn't have kids. He was like, you probably can't have kids anyway. So I believed that I couldn't even get pregnant for the longest time. And then when I wound up pregnant, not married, in this physically abusive relationship, it was like, well, this feels like it should never have even been possible. So there's got to be more. And then when God finally uprooted me out of that relationship and it finally was over and I could escape, and I left, and there's so much more to the story, but I finally met Matt. And at that point, I had just sworn off getting married. I was like, I'm never getting married. I'm going to do this on my own. I have no interest in a relationship. I'm done. And I fought that for not really that long, but I fought it so hard. I was like so opposed to having a relationship. And Matt was just like, no, I know that this is right for me. I know that you're the person for me.
And you two met when you were 7 months pregnant.
8.
7, 8 months pregnant. Yeah.
I think we met when I was like 6 or 7, but I never really actually met him. It was like introduced from a distance, kind of introduced. Like I didn't come up and introduce myself. He didn't introduce himself. We just kind of knew who each other were from a distance when I moved back. And then we started dating a week before Kaya was born. And it took that long because I was like, A, who could possibly want me right now? B, this is so much baggage. Like, and C, like this situation could be so complicated.
And you tried to talk him out of it.
I did. I gave him every opportunity. And I was like, listen, I'm not here to mess around. I don't have time for flings. I have a lot to lose. So I'm just telling you now, it's like a long-term thing for me. And if you're not in that, you can walk away. No hard feelings. We never have to talk about it again, but you're free and clear. You just like need to go ahead and take this chance. And he was like, I'm in this for the long term. Like I'm in this for the long run. You need to know that. And I was like, oh my gosh, will you please just give up? And I had so much like back and forth. Like, I said, I'm never getting married again, and I'm never dating, and I'm not doing this relationship stuff again. And he was just like, I don't really care what you said because you're not in charge. And I was like, okay, well, I guess we're doing this. And when Matt showed up at the hospital, actually, he showed up at the hospital right after Kaya was born and held him. And I knew that he was his daddy. And it was just the coolest. That was just the coolest moment for me, to be able to see him hold Kaya for the first time as just a few hours old. Like he was in the waiting room with you and RJ, right? You and RJ.
Your mom was in there with you.
Yeah, Allie and Mom held my legs. And you guys were out in the waiting room, and he was there while I was having this baby that like he did not have to decide what he decided.
I believe that Matt held Kaya before I did.
He did.
Because I wanted
Mom and Allie held him. Allie cut the umbilical cord. Mom held him. Allie held him. And then Matt held him. Actually, I think Mom handed him to Matt.
I believe so.
It was such a huge moment. It was so cool.
Well, I remember the next day even, because it was a Saturday when he was born, and then I had to preach that Sunday. And so we were, Matt was in church, and because he had been coming to church before you had moved back.
Yeah.
And so he rode with me back up to the hospital. And I remember he told me, he said, I just want you to know that I'm in this for the long haul. Like I know that she's the one God has chosen for me. So even then, like he was even expressing that to me.
I think he knew more than I knew.
Yeah,
he was more sure about it than I was, because I was still.
And he's fought for you since.
Ever since that day. Gosh, what's wrong with that guy? No, I'm glad for that. But I can definitely tie back a lot of that tenacity to a lot of those major moments in my life where God literally rescued me from that marriage, the first marriage. that was not an equally yoked marriage. And when I was released from that,
I had my reservations about that too.
I was so grateful that was over. And it was like the weirdest situation, like so strange. But the second relationship, there was a major moment in that relationship when I went on ladies retreat with Mom. I think Allie was there. I think Allie was there. Yep. And I stayed in a room with Shirley Evans, I think.
Yeah, she was there too.
I think she and I shared a room. And there was a moment when I heard the audible voice of God on that retreat, and that was a core shaking moment for me. And that was when I made the decision that I needed to leave, that I needed to get away, because it was so abusive and it was just so bad. And I made that decision on that trip. And then I started having pregnancy complications when I got back, but I heard the audible voice of God. We were reading the passage. I don't even remember what the passage was now. They were doing like a listening prayer thing. And so they asked us to close our eyes. And I think this was like October. So I was like 6 months pregnant. And yeah, they asked us to close our eyes. They read the passage. And it was the passage when Jesus sees Mary Magdalene outside of the tomb. And he says her name. And he's like, "Don't you know me?" And when they read the passage and he said her name, I heard him say in my spirit, "Lexie, turn and run to me." Just so clear. And I shattered. I just totally broke in that moment and cried. And I was like on my knees, like on the floor, just like had been praying, and I had chosen like a kind of a corner to kind of kneel down. And I was like laying there crying, and nobody knew. And it was just this really precious, quiet moment in my spirit with God. And to hear his voice, and that will always stick with me. And I couldn't describe it if you asked me to, because it's the voice of God.
Right.
But to hear him say, "Lexie, turn and run to me," it was so powerful. And that was when I decided. You never heard that?
No, that's the first time I've heard the actual encounter. I remember your mom saying that you had a breakthrough.
Yeah, huge breakthrough.
But I had no idea the actual
That's what it was.
Details.
Yeah, it was so
that was the first time
powerful. That was the first time I'd ever heard the audible voice of God. And it's also really the time that I remember the most clearly, because it was just so powerful in my life for that time. Because I had been praying and asking God to get me out of there, get me out of the relationship. I'd been journaling, and he had gone through my stuff and had read my prayers. And he was like, "I know you don't want to be with me anymore." And I was like, "Yeah, I wrote what I wrote. I want to be free from this." And he was like, I'm not. You can't. And I was just like, whatever. God's going to do something. And I remember calling you guys at one point and being like, "I'm being so spiritually oppressed and I need help. I need deliverance." And you guys did sort of a like spiritual intervention over the phone with me, because I was in Scott City and you were living here. And that was when I had decided that he had to go, and that I did everything I could to try to make him leave, and he refused to leave. And so not long after that, it was like a couple weeks later, I called you and I said, "I'm running out of money," because I started having pregnancy complications, and they put me on short-term disability because I was having really severe ocular migraines. And I was losing vision for hours at a time.
I remember that.
And my blood pressure was high, and I was just not doing super well. But because short-term disability is what it is, you only get it's like 60% of your normal wages or income. That's not really enough to live on when you're single and paying all the bills on your own. And so
because he was not helping that whatsoever.
No, because drugs and dealing drugs will do that. And yeah, so I had told him, I'd warned him. I was like, listen, I'm moving out at the end of the week. Like, I can't afford to pay bills. He was like, well, let my family help pay. And I'm like, no, your family doesn't have money to do that. I'm not going to ask other people to pay my bills. I'm just going to fix my situation. And he just didn't believe me. And I started packing boxes. And he was like, I don't know why you're packing. I don't know where you think you're going. And I was like, well, I told you I don't have money to keep paying the apartment and insurance on my car and all of your bills and buying all the food and stuff. And so he didn't believe me. And I called you that Saturday morning, or that Friday, I think Thursday, Friday, you and I had talked. And I said, I need to come home. I can't keep doing this. I can't keep paying my bills right now. I'm not getting enough.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not helping, and I need to get out of here. I just need to be done. And you said, okay, what time does he go to work? And I said, he leaves for work at like 7. And you said, all right, I'll be there at 7:30. And sure enough, he left for work. You showed up at my door. We loaded all my stuff. He was supposed to be home at like 12:30 or so. And we had my whole apartment moved out, packed up, on the road. I was halfway to Sharon, and he tried to call me, and I ignored it. So he texted me and was like, I can't believe you actually did that. And what am I supposed to do? You have any idea how terrible it feels to be in a house with no stuff in it? It was like, it was all my stuff.
Manipulation.
Yeah, all the manipulation and stuff. And then he stayed there that night and was like, you don't have any idea how terrible this feels. I'm like, you've been living with your mom. What are you doing?
Yeah, he was in that anyway.
Yeah,
well,
so
your mom and I
had
been praying for you through that time too. God would get your attention, and he would open the way for you and show you what you needed to do. And
yeah.
so we were ready when you made that phone call. We were ready to step into that. And and I had no idea the extent of the abuse that you were experiencing until sometime later. You ended up going to court, and after filing a restraining order, and he violated that, and then I heard more of the details account for the first time from the stand, which was
that was not
as
a
a
good
father
time to hear it.
was very, very trying of my own flesh, but
with him sitting over there too. Yeah.
But you know what? We all have our moments of trial and error in life, and our encounters, whether we pay attention to them or not. God's trying to get our attention, and he definitely
the whole time
got your attention. So thank you for sharing all that. That's amazing how God has worked so much through your life, and as a father, just to be a witness to all that and see how far you've come. And it's a beautiful thing to see your family now and how God has used it. And so
3 kids later, 10 years, married 10 years now, 3 kids later.
So it's beautiful. And I just thank you for sharing and making yourself vulnerable and transparent. And thank you for joining us here at Realm 3 Studio.